allemaal.
Good morning, everybody.
Ja, mooi. Goed, dames en heren.
Yesterday we have presented to you perhaps a rather unusual approach on kids and their development. We don't consider a child as a blank slate, but since we take reincarnation as a starting point, we can consider children as our former colleagues, each with their own constructed character and developed qualities. They have just not completed their training for this new job, in this new incarnation. Everything this colleague has developed in his past lives will be gone through and taken out during the period we know as youth. We call this process recapitulation. This is a cyclic process that is also happening on a large scale. As humanity, we learn to improve expressing this divine core, which we are in a sense, by continuously reusing physical instruments. We see that consciousness envelops itself in the instrument it progresses, gets familiar with its vehicle, and by gaining experience and processing these experiences, it develops or evolves. And during this process, the instrument wraps itself in and moves to the background. And these are two aspects of exact same process. The reincarnating part of every human being enwraps itself as from birth in the persona, the temporary role of the vehicle in this specific life as to start developing from a particular moment. It is the one process in which you can distinguish two aspects, recapitulation, the re-enwrapping and redeveloping of characteristics during youth proceeds in certain cycles or phases with each other their own possibilities and sensitivities. In yesterday's lecture, we have presented these principles and the first phases of youth. At first, the phase in which the highest aspect, the sense of unity, sort of expresses itself in the physical body. This is the birth and the period thereafter. Then the phase in which the conscience, the notion of harmony and interconnectedness roots in the feelings, the emotion and the instinctive reaction, the astral part of human constitution. Roughly speaking, this is the age they have when going to the kindergarten. Basically, there is a lot of overlap between the different phases, and of course, in every child they deviate a little. We have mentioned that as human beings with our current focus on the external world, often only notice the instrument, the persona, and we are less aware of the consciousness of incarnating part behind it. We see a cute baby with its first smile and later the first words and steps, but we often do not realize that we are dealing with a full human being, in essence a divine being, just not yet able to fully express itself. This lecture is about the phases of the child going to elementary school. We take up on the following questions: which qualities are being recapitulated in this phase? How can we recognize these are in these children? How can educators guide their child? During this phase at elementary school, two elements comes forward stronger: intellect, thinking, and vitality. In Sanskrit, manas and prana. Thinking involves, embeds itself, and vitality evolves, develops itself.
What is thinking, by the way? If consciousness consists of perceiving, of being conscious, then thinking is some sort of observation, observing thoughts. Thinking distinguishes us humans from the lower kingdoms in nature. Even though we can detect a certain form of intelligence in these lower kingdoms, it is not the ability to think we see here. The ability that features us humans, being able to reflect on something consciously, look at the situation from a distance, and therefore also be aware of ourselves as a thinker. We can define concepts, reason, analyze, and we can draw logical conclusions based on assumptions. Every being has free will to some extent, but in thinking, self-conscious beings, this reaches a whole new dimension. Thinking creates the ability to oversee actions and the possible consequences of these actions, and also the ability to direct the consciousness. And obviously, this freedom comes with a much larger responsibility. Since a thought precedes an action, repeated actions form a habit, and joint habits form a character, the nature of a thought means everything for the nature of a character. How we think is the foundation for our actions and also for how we feel. It influences our choices and what we think is true. Looking at it from this angle, it even determines what we perceive and what not. All these thinking faculties together and their orientation determine how a family, a group, a class, society, or the world looks. As we have mentioned before, a human's youth is a recapitulation of the constructed qualities in previous lives. At the same time, you can recognize the recapitulation of all humanity's development. And our humanity is, how else possible, in its boundlessness, just a phase, a class or step in the large school. There has been a phase in humanity's development in which thinking of mankind was helped to become active. Our older brothers, like colleagues in high school, in Eastern traditions they are called Manasaputras, or sons of the thinking faculty, then lighted the fire of our thinking in us, like you lit one candle with another one. These, for us divine beings, did this because thinking, and therefore self-consciousness, gives humanity the ability to accelerate its own evolution and expression of this divine core. It goes beyond intellect alone. Thinking is the gate to self-consciousness, to experiencing self-conscious, the inner human, the inner God. So we can see thinking as a divine fire. In essence, this is the higher manas, the higher ability to think, which is focused to see beyond the external transitory world and see the what, why, and how behind it. So we're not talking about the cold, calculating intellect, but about the intellect that is inspired by buddhi, the notion of connections and correlations, and atman, the sense of unity. Like the Manasaputras helped us to awake our thinking, so should we, as parents, educators, teachers, actually everyone in society, help children to awake and use this inner ability, the higher thinking. How can we see this independent higher thinking awakening in children? Children make attempts to address what lives inside them in their thoughts. The notion of unity and harmony and the ability to distinguish, which was cherished in previous phases, comes up in their consciousness in the form of wonderment. They'll start to ask questions. Questions about good or bad, about how nature works, what life is, or if things you can't see still exist. Right in those questions and the kids' reasoning, we recognize independent thinking.
A kid can ask, for example, who is real me? The person I am at school or the one I am at home? What exactly is nature? Does something exist that is not nature? Can something exist if we cannot see, hear, smell or taste it? Besides the why questions, all sort of how questions arise as well. Some sort of scientific mentality is created, a new sort of interest in the surrounding world, complete with experiments and search. How does it all work? What is out there? There is a lot of interest in nature, items are being collected, categorized, hobbies are created and interests developed. Microscopes and telescopes reveal undiscovered worlds. Another thing that arises is to measure is to know. The child realizes that by doing its own research, things can be discovered and new knowledge can be gained. Simultaneously, with the evolution of the independent intellectual thinking, the vitality aspects develops itself in this phase. With this, we mean the life energy or strength which is necessary for activities. Activities on every level require a certain amount of vitality, whether it is about physical movement or about thinking. The latter can also be vital or rather slow. We can recognize vitality in daily life when it predominates, doing something for the sake of doing something without thinking about it. On an average schoolyard, we can see abundance of vitality. Kids are running, climbing, jumping rope, or playing tag. With younger children, playing does not have that much structure yet, but as they get older, they will see the physical vitality become more focused and more structured. The rules of the games become more complicated, tactics and strategy becomes more and more important. Due to the collaboration of thinking and vitality, a whole new world opens up for the child. Because the child becomes gradually more capable of fulfilling what is, often with others, thinks of. It is going to build huts, creates his own worlds, including treasures, advantages are elaborated in detail. Every time we see here the thinking and imagination, anticipating when we do this now, then you can fill in the blanks. Thinking about the possibilities and being able to carry them out give a sense of freedom. The vitality controlled by thinking make gymnastics, sports and dance possible, as well as learning how to play an instrument, and it is not without a reason why this is the phase in which children learn how to read and write. The vitality in this is then being used to do something with an aim. It is being channeled by the mind. The awakening of the ability to think independently also has a downside. Thought, the accompanying self-consciousness, the expanded freedom and discernment can also result in a sense of separateness. The discrimination between I and the other is going to play a role. In combination with the developed vitality and predilection for measuring of things, this may lead to competitive spirits and competing with each other, or even with the wish to be better than the other. The persona, the instrument, wants to leave its mark, makes itself known, finds itself more important than others and cannot empathize. Consciousness that identifies itself with the external, with the role it plays in this life, instead of with the actor behind this temporary role. This may lead to a fight, wanting to overrule the feelings, the using force and exclusion. The consequences of such a mentality are found everywhere in the world. The focus on the own personality can also lead to insecurity or self-pity.
Just like it is self-evident in nature that the higher helps the lower and that nothing can even manifest, let alone develop, without the collaboration with other beings, it is evident that a child needs other people to awaken the higher thinking. Society, the school, and in the first place, of course, the parents or educators, help the child by stimulating the higher thinking and how it can be used. We have seen yesterday that in Rãja-Yoga education, attention is paid to the duality in human beings as from the very first start. The child learns playfully that inner subjects such as compassion, equality, cooperation, and unity are far more important and more real than personal external differences. The sense of unity and the intuitive sense of harmony are addressed by the educators, while the instrumental side, the body, the feelings and instincts, is constructed accordingly, as we saw yesterday. Also, when the independent thinking becomes active again, educators can address the imperishable aspect, bringing it to expression, while the aspect of the vehicle, in this case vitality, is being formed and constructed in harmony with it, so that children gain as much benefit when they further develop their thinking faculty in puberty and young adulthood. How can we do this? By exploring in nature, going to museums, seeing plays, questions arise, as well as new things to think about. Sometimes things may look completely different when you look at them different, for instance through a magnifying glass. And becoming acquainted with other habits, cultures, further expands the child's horizon. Often, stories about heroes experiencing adventures and overcoming difficulties often result in much food for thought. For young children, this can also be fairy tales or stories about animals. The story of the life of Gautama the Buddha can be used very well to trigger the higher thoughts. In fact, the child has everything in itself. It has sense of unity, is aware of cohesion and connection, has discernment. It only has to learn to convert this into thoughts, so to speak. This is why we quote Plato here and say, learning is remembering. If we assume that the highest is present in every human being, we can call upon this and in every question start with a universal, as wide as possible and noble vision. This is also known as the deductive or Platonic method. In the form of a conversation or dialogue, we can try to bring this widest and most noble vision forward and approach the dilemma from this. For example, the girl that asks her mother who she really is, the girl at school or the girl at home, she asked this question because she had a certain experience. She noticed that she behaves different at home compared to at school. Because she knows that she really is the same person in those situations, the question comes, who am I really? It is therefore a very good question, which deserves further study. You can start to investigate this together. You will make the question more universal and search for the core of the question, what is a human actually? You will stimulate your child to create the most noble or universal image of a human.
From that point you go and start to search what the child has experienced. At different possible answers you will try to find the assumptions the answer is based on and compare these with the most universal image. The child now gets a chance to search for answers on his questions in himself. You only have to ask the questions and perhaps summarize something or make a suggestion. Everything at the level and in words the child can understand, of course. And you do not have to expect a final and comprehensive answer, as there will always be more insight possible. But the child will experience that he or she is seen as an equal collocator, and that it has the freedom to try and formulate the inner knowledge. It will learn to reason logically based on assumptions, think why he or she has an opinion about something. This is how an independent investigative approach. For a fruitful conversation, the educators need to have activated these higher aspects of thinking to a certain extent, of course. A lot of love, understanding and patience and of course self-knowledge is needed to guide a child in this process. The insight of Socrates, not pretending to know if one does not know it, about the essence of the subject that is the good guideline here. An open mind as well as a courage is needed to explore one's own opinion. It is certainly not true that thinking independently can only be stimulated by conversations. Also from participating in sport, a child can learn a lot. Not only through the insight and discipline which are part of the sport, but also through cooperation with the team members, whether these are your friends or not, and taking responsibility in the sport club. And this, of course, applies as also for playing an instrument in a band or an orchestra or for acting in a play. Also at home, it is important that a child gets a chance to take its responsibility in a larger group. A good conversation often comes up when you are doing something together, cycling, going for a walk, doing chores in the garden and preparing food. At the same time, you will get to know your child better. Find out whether his or interests or qualities lie, and you can take these into account when needed or adjust it if necessary. When both the child or the educator realize that the child carries everything in him, when it knows that everything is part of the boundlessness, if it learns to reason logically, then it cannot conclude anything else from the thought of unity then the equality of each being and the other human being is therefore afflicted with the same possibilities or problems. Compassion, empathy and helpfulness are then logic traits. In other words, by addressing the higher thoughts in the reincarnating path as an educator, children will learn to trust their own higher self and they will gain self-esteem. They experience that they have inner touchstones. This makes them independent researchers with a strong character who will always be capable to wonder and therefore new discoveries.
So this was my presentation. Joka will, in the next presentation, continue on this. If you have any questions. Questions about the presentation? This morning I read a page in a book on education, and I read this, and it wondered me. It was about enwonderment, and the part I remembered is that the child becomes challenged by educating, and I feel challenged by being here.
Dank u wel. Goed.
Nee.
Oké, dank u wel, Anja.
Okay, we now go to the next lecture.
Rãja-Yoga, inspiratie voor elk